Welcome back to another episode of Foolproof Theology. My name is Chase Davis, and I am your host. It's great to be with you here today. We're going to have a good conversation with Owen Anderson, a returning guest, about a new book on Samson, the judge, and Judge is the biblical character, getting more familiar with him and how Samson and his story is relevant for us today. Before we get into that, I wanted to make sure you knew about a few partners of the program. First, if you haven't gone over to farmerbillsprovisions.com, you can head over there and get your protein needs met through their American-made biltong. Head over to farmerbillsprovisions.com. Order today. Use code FOOLPROOF to get 20% off your order. That's FULLPROOF at farmerbillsprovisions.com. Also, we have a partnership with Legacy Profits Club. If you're looking to get into day trading or trading stocks without losing all your money, which is very, very common, head over to Legacy Profits Club. Derek over there can help train you how to get involved in investing with strategy and skill, and so that you know what you're doing. It's helped me a lot because when I look at those charts on stocks, something goes wrong in my brain, like I'm back in economics and it doesn't work, but Derek has helped me a lot over there. Lastly, head over to ionlayer.com, use code FPT to get $100 off your first kit. Ion Layer is a topical patch that you use to get NAD plus supplements. Typically at an IV treatment place, these cost like thousands of dollars, but it's super affordable over at Ion Layer. It helps boost your recovery after workout, your mental acuity. Your NAD plus levels decline as you age, so you need to get them back up. Head over to ionlayer.com, use code FPT to get $100 off your first kit. It's 100% money back guarantee. If you don't like it, you can always return it. All right, let's get into today's conversation with Owen Anderson. It is good to be with you here today, and I am joined by a returning guest, Owen Anderson. He is a professor down at Arizona State University. We've had him on a few times to talk about a book on postmillennialism, also talking about philosophy. You can go find those in the archives if you look them up. But Owen, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Hey, I always love talking with you.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And sometimes you get to venture up to Boulder. Sometimes we connect, but it's a great time. How are things down at ASU nowadays? I know there's a bit of good trouble you were causing with some DEI stuff. Are things going well on that front?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. We're just getting back into our semester. And so I had a case going against some required training that ASU had for us employees that was teaching about the problems of whiteness and heteronormativity. So that started about 2 years ago almost now. Now that Trump came in, the whole atmosphere has changed. But ASU is still defending that in court. So we won the first level at the normal court level. They appealed it, and we're waiting to hear from the appellate judge. I'm assuming whoever loses will go to the Arizona Supreme Court, because we on our side want a firm decision, in Arizona law, that you can't teach racism under any name. Call it DEI, call it, being not racist, anti-racist is still racism.
That's great. Well, I'm glad God is blessing your efforts, and hopefully me and my listeners will continue to pray and support you as we can. You wrote a book recently, it's out now, on Samson, called Samson, the Biblical Hero, How to Fight Unbelief. There it is. If you're watching on YouTube, he held up a screenshot. I'll put a link in the show notes for anyone who's listening. I'm really excited to talk about this book because we preached through Judges recently in the last couple of years at our church, and it was just a very powerful exploration of the text and exposition of the text and application of it, particularly when you realize many of the modern commentaries, when they treat these heroes of the faith, as they're called in Hebrews 11, they often treat them negatively. And there's only a few resources out there like yours that will treat them positively. So what kind of inspired you when you were thinking about all the things you're doing in life, teaching and writing? What made you say, I'm going to write about Samson?
Well, I was looking, there's kind of a couple angles that came at it. One was the exact thing you're saying. I think the book of Judges is a great picture for the church today, as we've been given the task of the Great Commission. And just like the Israelites, we often ignore it. We compromise with the world. We don't look much different than the Philistines. And so because of that, we can come under divine judgment. And God expects us to fulfill our purpose. So I think there's a lot of lessons we can draw from Judges, but then especially Samson, because as you mentioned, he's in the hall of the faithful. He's held up as someone to admire. But in my upbringing, kind of broadly evangelical, if Samson came up, it was as a cautionary tale. It was as, this is a broken man who can't control his appetites and his anger, and yet God used him anyway. So it's kind of almost like men are a concession. Well, we know you guys aren't too good, but God will use you anyway, just like he did with Samson. Well, as I started getting into the text, and especially into Reformed commentaries, I saw that's not at all how he's treated. And then at the same time, I'm kind of hearing it, in the back of my head when I go on social media, young men are looking for a hero. And so there's a few things they're hearing. For example, Jordan Peterson. And what he's doing is he's just reviving Joseph Campbell's hero journey. And he's plugging Christ in as one of the heroes of the world's religions. And Christians are excited because they're used to the new atheists who say there was no Jesus, or if there was, he didn't rise from the dead. Well, now you've got a guy, Jordan Peterson, saying, oh, sure, he rose from the dead. And Christians don't realize, well, he means archetypally. Right? He's not speaking historically, but they're just glad that it's not Richard Dawkins, I guess. And so as I'm listening to the hero story, I'm thinking, no, that's the worldly hero story. I call it the Lucifer hero story. We actually need the biblical hero story. And in the Old Testament, Samson's one of those people that we should hold up. So all of that kind of came together to say, I think our young men need to have Samson given to them in the correct way so they have him as a hero to admire and want to emulate.
Yeah, and what's interesting about Samson is there's a lot of text in Judges devoted to his story, more
Mhm.
so it seems than many other of the heroes. I think Gideon is one of those that's
Mhm.
noteworthy that receives a lot of attention. But we get the story of Samson with Delilah, Samson,
Yep.
defeating the Philistines with a bone. I think it was a jawbone, if I'm remembering
Yeah.
correctly.
Yep.
And then he's captured. He's in prison once his hair gets cut, which is its own fascinating thing,
Mhm.
and then he tears down the pillars on
Yeah.
himself and on God's enemies. So just really heroic figure. But if we were to write, let's say we were to try to get into the mind of kind of general evangelical
Mhm.
culture in America, you kind of alluded to it. I'm trying to think of how we would articulate it. Like you said,
Yeah.
we would probably say, well, Samson was very fallen, obviously had lust issues. Um,
Well, I'm going
you
to cut.
know,
We'll talk about those in a minute. I might surprise your audience.
Yeah, well,
What
go ahead
surprised you with
because
some of that?
I want
Mhm.
to I want to hear what were some of the myths that we hear
Mhm.
about Samson,
Yeah.
like we've talked about, but what are some applications?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the first thing people think of is a lustful guy who can't control himself. So I'm going to just go right to the end so everyone knows where we're going. And I think this is what will capture the evangelical mind as well is Samson's a typology for Christ. He points us to Christ. And I think the Old Testament does that on purpose. Judges does that on purpose in one way, almost step by step through his life. And so when we understand that, he's not just like a one-off story. He's telling the people of Israel what to expect in the Messiah. And then on top of that, I'd add one more interesting element is I'd call him the John the Baptist of David. So he precedes David the way that John the Baptist does Christ, and he sort of prepares the field, so to speak, against the Philistines. He starts the war that David ends against the Philistines. So you're right to say in this part of the book, the Philistines, not Babylon or Egypt, the Philistines are the picture of worldliness and the world against the church. So that's a long story short. This is pointing us to Christ. So let's look at some of the details right away. He's one of three persons in the scriptures that gets an announcement at their birth. There's something going on here different than other births. And so we learn about his Nazarite vow. And that's one of the first things people will critique and say, well, he broke the vow. And what's interesting to me is I think that tells us more about the reader than about Samson because the text never says that until the hair cutting. We read a lot into the text in order to slander Samson. That's surprising. So with the vow, we'll say, well, show me where, besides he eventually cuts his hair, where does he do that? Well, there was wine at the wedding. Sure, it doesn't say he had any. Okay, but he touched this carcass of the dead lion. Well, yeah, but the prohibition is against being around a human corpse. He's allowed to eat meat. I mean, if it meant no animal corpses, he'd have to be a vegetarian. And so both of those are things the text doesn't bring up. We just read that into it to say he broke his vow. But then the wedding itself, this is one of three women that he's involved with, and that's usually what people think of him as. Oh, he's a womanizer. But what's interesting in the text is what it does tell us is he was led by the Spirit to go marry this Philistine woman. Now his father objects, and perhaps his father didn't know he was led, so his father raises maybe a very natural question: Hey, you should marry an Israelite. But Samson's being led to do something which in the life of the prophets, we see that they live out certain things that point to what Christ will do. He's offering peace to the Philistines as a husband does to a bride. She will come into his household and obey the laws of Moses, and that Philistines would do the same. So through that picture of a husband going to get the bride of unbelief and bring her in to be cleansed, that's what Samson's offering them. And it's important to see that he starts off with that, because people usually think of him as lustful and violent. But he doesn't start with violence at all. He starts with an offer of peace.
That's beautiful. I love that. And then, there's a interesting corollary. It reminds me of Adam and Eve
Mhm.
with Samson and Delilah, kind of looking back, where, she's trying to, she is obviously with Samson, but at the same time, she's torn,
Mhm.
and they want to know how to defeat Samson, this strong man. And
Yeah.
eventually he gives in. Do
Yeah,
you,
let me
do you, t-
save that one though.
okay.
For because that's gonna be it blew my mind when I saw what was going on with Delilah. But, you're right, though. You were making a point, though, about Adam and Eve, which I think go ahead.
Yeah, I think, with Adam listening to the voice of his wife,
Mhm. Yeah.
and then him incurring judgment also by eating the fruit, and falling into sin. I think there's
Mhm.
some interesting, corollaries there
Yeah.
about, the danger. So it is an interesting. There's so many stories like this in Judges, and
Yeah. Well,
especially
it's
with. I don't know if you take it this way, but the way I took it was it's almost like a cyclical decline,
Mhm.
in that each judge reflects the character of the people at that time. And
Mhm.
so as we progress in the book, I mean, we eventually get to a retelling of Sodom and Gomorrah in the
Yeah.
book of Judges.
Yep.
And so Samson shouldn't necessarily be judged. Of course, he should be assessed as a human man falling, needing
Mhm.
faith in God, which he displays, mighty faith, but also has these natural proclivities to fall into either temptation or redo some of the sins that were original sins. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so, except for the image you gave is right, like, Eve listening to the serpent, the word of the serpent, and then bringing her husband that direction rather than the husband washing his wife with the word of God.
Right. Yeah.
And so I'm making the case for this first wife that's mentioned. So this is Judges 13 through 16. In chapter 14, we get this story about this first wife. And there are some parallels with Delilah, because she has her family, her extended family, the Philistines, and they assign a group of young men, particularly to keep an eye on Samson. You kind of wonder, like, what are they? They're already kind of worried about him.
Yeah.
But then she's given these two choices: her husband, who again is a type of Christ, or the world. And the world tells her, we want to figure out this riddle. Give us the secret. Now, and Samson had kind of gone along with them in the sense that they like riddles. It's not necessarily a Hebrew thing, but the Philistines, the Greek peoples liked riddles, and so they have this game where he'll give them a riddle. If they can figure it out, they win and get clothes. If he figures out, he gets it. And so he posits a riddle, which I talk about in the book. I think you could figure it out if you're thinking about it, but they go and cheat, and they draw her away from her husband. Now she could have said, Samson, the Philistines are trying to cheat, but you're my husband. And she could have cleaved to him as we're supposed to with Christ. But instead, she went to the world. She got the secret. And this is one of the times where people say that, they kind of call Samson stupid. With Delilah's the next one. Why did he tell her? Doesn't he know what's going on? Yes. Doesn't Christ know what we're doing? He's very long suffering. He's actually the opposite of a hot headed guy. He's long suffering with her. He tells her, but he's still giving her a chance to repent. Will she use it to betray him? She ends up doing that. And so he loses the bet. He goes down and kills Philistines to get the clothes he has to pay. And then he goes home. And I think that's another interesting point, is that he doesn't like take his anger out on her. He doesn't actually show a flash of anger. He says, I'm going to go to my dad's house and calm down. That's how I'd interpret it. And once he's calmed down, he comes back and he wants to be with his wife. They're married. There's been no legal divorce, but her father gave her to someone else. I mean, just as a husband, contemplate that.
Yeah.
You gave my wife to another man? And he says, well, yeah, but take her sister. That's not how it works. And so then you see Samson begin to attack the Philistines. because they had this full out rejection of his offer of peace. So he burns their fields. They come out after him. And here's a point I think that you will resonate with. You and I are quite involved as public intellectuals. The people of Judah come to Samson and say, knock it off.
Mm.
Our plan, Samson, is we're going to huddle in a corner and be quiet, and we hope the Philistines don't bother us. If you make all this noise, they might remember we're here and they might attack us. Because right now they're under Philistine rule. They can't even sharpen their plows without Philistine permission. I think that is a picture of us. We have to send, not have to, but many people send their kids to public school to have their mind sharpened by the LGBTQ plus philosophy. We're under their control, just like the Philistines controlled Israel. And their plan is, many Christians plan today, we'll be nice, win some, we'll get along, and hopefully they'll leave us alone. Well, they don't leave you alone. And they force you to break God's law. And so Samson says, no, I'm not going to do that. And he lets them bind him. So here's another image of Christ being handed over by his own people to the world. Just as the Jews would bind Christ and hand him over to the Romans, Judah binds him and hands him to the Philistines. And then another miraculous event happens where he can rip those, and he picks up the jawbone you mentioned, and he kills 1,000 Philistines, which is, I mean, we have pictures of Neo, but it's computer image of Neo fighting Mr. Smith, right? 1,000 of them. Yeah. But this is real life. Like, I'm in martial arts. You can't really fight even two people. Because once you're fighting this guy, the other guy's going around behind you. So this would be amazing to see this battle. And so he defeats them all by himself. So you have this picture of Christ handed over to the world, but he defeats the world. And that alone should have been enough for Israel to say, we're 100% behind Samson.
Man, that's so true. That's so good. The other story, and I want to ask some questions about some application, but the other story that I think confounded me as a young man, and it still is kind of as you go back to the text and you read your Bible, it's still one that's like, I know the answer, I know the biblical truth. At the same time, it is a confounding thing, and the way God writes stories will do that. But with Samson getting captured, being tied to the pillars he brings down, I think the obvious connection is, Christ and his death kills death, the death of death in Christ. But it is an act that seems odd, almost like somebody who would take his own life and take others. That's not always seen as noble. So how are we to understand that biblically and typologically?
Yeah, that specific event, Augustine is one who addresses the question of suicide and shows this is not a suicide so much as it's like throwing yourself into battle, and you'll probably die in it, but you're destroying the enemy. So I don't think that's a suicide. And it's one of the places, the instance I just shared, when Judah comes to him, he actually gives what I consider to be an argument from natural law. But it's one of the places people fault him. I mean, it's almost like when you read Samson, the evangelical faults him at each point. Because what he says is, I only did to them what they did to me. And people say, see how selfish that is? But no, that's an argument from justice. Justice is treating equals equally. And so we have to remember that not only is he a person who can understand justice and make natural law arguments, he's also the judge of Israel. And so when you strike the judge of Israel, you're striking Israel. He has an obligation to respond in that way that maybe a private citizen, so to speak, doesn't. And so now flash forward to the instance you're talking about. I think it's the same situation. They bound the judge of Israel. They have him for entertainment. That's another one someone said to me is, well, see, but he's doing entertainment to try to get them to spare his life. And that's not the entertainment. The entertainment, I think, is the same as the way they entertain themselves with Christ. They're beating him, kicking him, whipping him. They're finding enjoyment in that. And his thought is still about his role as a judge. Let me strike more now than I ever have. And so he is, even in that last moment, I think, a picture of Christ overcoming worldliness, which is the Philistines.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, the story where he pulls down the pillars and defeats the enemies. I mean, this is just a wonderful picture of what Christ does. And this role as a judge, you kind of hint at it in the book, and you talked about natural law and that kind of thing. He's kind of a philosopher king,
I say that same thing. He is 100%.
He's and this judge, I think we misunderstand it because modern terminology doesn't really fit the title of judges. These are deliverers that God raises up in order to defeat the enemies of God's people as they cry out to him or they need deliverance. And so how does Samson kind of embody this philosopher king motif that really I think is compelling to a lot of men today who don't want to
Yeah.
be stuck
Mhm.
just being nerds in books, but also don't want to be just a jock. Samson embodies both. How does he do that though?
Yeah, I think that's such a beautiful image. That's I have a whole section in the book on the idea that he's the true philosopher king compared to the Platonic one, where the Greek philosopher king is ruling over a world that's not our home. We're supposed to die and go to the disembodied spiritual state. Whereas in the Hebrew world, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. And the Lord's glory already fills the earth. And by spreading the word of the Lord to fill the world, we're supposed to also have the world be filled with the knowledge of that glory. So that was true for the Hebrews as well, even though it's a little bit different for them because people were to come to Israel, whereas for Christians, we go into all nations. But even so, he is the ruler on earth of that message. And the word judge is you're right. Our judges don't do this, but judge here means the person who knows the law of Moses and applies it to Israel. And that's the key is that God is the king, so to speak, that gave the law, and now he has judges that apply it. And Samson's not the way that the story is told is you don't get a lot of times with him kind of reflecting and thinking about philosophy. That doesn't mean he didn't. It's just not how the story's told. It's very action focused. But you do get these little glimmers of how he reasons. And for example, I did to them what they did to me. They have no complaint. That's what justice is. And then later on, when he asks, "Let me take vengeance," people say, "Well, see, he just wants vengeance," but he's asking for vengeance of the Lord because he can't break the pillars himself, and it's for the name of God to be upheld against the god Dagon, not just for Samson. And so that's why on my book I use a classical picture of Samson where he's just a 25-ish looking guy. He's not muscle bound, and most of the time when you think of Samson, he's like roided up. But
Yeah.
that means that you think he's using his muscles to break these pillars, and that has nothing to do with it. He could be just a normal looking guy. It's the spirit of the Lord that comes on him that allows him to defeat. The picture has the jawbone, 1,000 Philistines, or break down these pillars. It's not because he was like lifting weights every day or something.
That's funny, yeah, and even when we look at the New Testament, Romans 13, we see that the civil magistrate has the authority to be God's avenger,
Mhm.
and so, yeah, it's a total misreading of the position and authority that Samson carried. You
But it
talked
does tap into
about
what you said. Men today
yeah,
are looking for leadership examples. And so I have at the beginning, I talk about that. I talk about the Greek view of that. I talk about Jordan Peterson's view of the hero and make the case that really the heroes we need are the ones listed in Hebrews. And Samson in the Old Testament, he's a type of Christ. He's John the Baptist to David. The more we understand him, the more we'll see how we should take action in our day.
yeah, that's great. One of the things I know you talk about in the book is kinda Samson and feminism. Um,
Mhm.
you know, kinda tease that out for the listener. What does it look like to have, I don't know that we could read feminism back into the text, but we do have feminism rampant in our world today.
Mhm.
What is kind of the relationship there?
Well, that and yeah, in our day, I think that's one of the things that young men are responding to. And so it was about maybe it's been about 6 months ago, but we had for a while we're in social media, young Christian men saying, "Hey, there's some good things in Andrew Tate." And Andrew Tate's big thing is kind of like he's the other side of feminism. And so young men are saying, "Hey, we've lived under 5 decades of feminism. It's gotten us only misery and wickedness, nothing good." And so I know they're looking for where to land. So I think, of course, the biblical example will always be far superior to Andrew Tate or someone like that. But the pictures that we get of the husband and wife in Samson, I think, is the biblical corrective to feminism. Whether it's at the level of a type of Christ and his church, or Samson offering love to his wife and being slow to anger, being patient with her, even when he knows she's betraying him. Um, and showing that kind of love and that leadership that a husband should have. And so I think even though his reputation is he's a womanizer, actually he demonstrates some very important qualities for husbands to have in their families.
Man, this is great because this is so needed. I mean, your book
Mhm.
couldn't be more needed in terms of you referenced that you went back to kind of Protestant Reformed commentaries or anything like that. But as far as modern commentaries, when we were preaching through this, this was what we needed, a book that would kinda help us, and we need this, I think, for every judge. That would be very,
Yeah,
I
when
think
I
of the story
well,
of,
but there is a special the reason I picked him first is there's a special tie to Christ. Like, he's the one who lays down his life at the end, but he's
yeah,
also the one who has the picture of the bride and the groom. And so I think for up until Judges, he after Abraham offering up Isaac, Samson's the next time where you get such a clear picture of what Christ will do for his bride. And and so let's look at the next story about there's 3 women in his life, and in chapter 16, most of that's about Delilah, but there's this little mention at the beginning. One day, Samson went to Gaza where he saw a prostitute. He went in to spend the night with her. And so again, in youth group, if this is covered at all, it's covered as, yeah, this is a guy who doesn't have any control and he doesn't want his people to know. So he goes to the enemies to be with their prostitutes. So it's secret. So let me suggest some things. Um, we never think that way about the 2 spies that were in Jericho. We know they were going to an out of the way inn, which is where is owned by a prostitute. That's where people go there, but they're not going there for that reason. They're going to hide because they're spying it out. And what happens next seems to indicate that's why Samson was there. He's not there to go to prostitute. He's there to do battle. He's spying it out. And so he stays in an out of the way place. Now, in the language, though, there's a little bit of difference because I think in the Jericho case, it says, and they stayed there. And here it says he went into her,
mhm,
which is very often a euphemism for sex.
right,
But we know there are other times, there are other euphemisms for sex, like she uncovered his feet, which aren't
right,
always sex. So
right,
even then, that doesn't tell us 100% that that's all he's doing there. It's also odd that he would have such power of the spirit right after that, because
yes,
eventually, when he does give up his hair, he loses that power. Whereas next, he's going to do a great feat of strength. So that seems odd. However, sometimes the Bible, especially the Old Testament, does just describe something. It is immoral. It doesn't comment on the immorality of it. So that alone doesn't prove it. So at least this much to say, simply faulting him immediately, it doesn't seem to be there. The text doesn't say that. He may very well have just been hiding there. Um, he is a human, though. I'm not saying he's Christ. I'm not saying he's sinless.
right.
But it's not the easy thing that he's just a lustful guy. It seems like he's there to go cause problems, which I kind of admire. Like, he's not waiting for them to come here. He defeated them on Judah territory. His next thing is, I'm going down there to cause problems.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a good point because oftentimes when we read the Bible with a story like Samson or others, we typically assume a narrative about
Mhm.
these figures that is more speculative than I think most people would like to realize. That we
Mhm.
read either from flannel graphs in Sunday school or other sermons we've heard. Classic one, of course, being about David and how we
Yeah.
shouldn't aspire to be like David or embody David.
Yeah.
Um, and that's why I think books like this are so important. Um, what would it look like if we were to kind of apply today? What would a Samson in America be like if we need an American Samson?
Mhm.
What would be some like indicators that this is a man that is being led by the Spirit in the same way that's kind of conquering and taking ground from the enemy?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the things I bring out in the book are, again, he's not doing what you'd expect of a philosopher. He doesn't give you like long paragraphs about the nature of good and evil or something. So instead, we infer things from his actions and the few arguments he does give, some really good arguments. And so the case I make in the book is that Samson understood the revelation given to Moses, and he bases his life on that. Now we have the whole Bible now, so it'd be for us the whole Bible, but it's the same point, which is you're looking for someone who affirms the truths of the Bible and then is applying them in, I would call it like an advanced way, maybe like use the analogy of as Marines. We're landing on the beaches to set up a base for the army to come in later. We're the advanced front of the conflict. You're looking for guys that are doing that. And just like he goes down to Gaza, who's going down into the enemy camp and setting up base and saying, "Hey, I'm here now."
Yeah, I think I've talked about this with our church, but I won't go
Mhm.
into
Well,
detail and bore the listener. But this is like, there's a lot of movement today from red
mhm.
states to or blue states to red states mainly,
Yep.
and it's like this is kind of what we do as Christians. We kind of you got to be prudent, you got to honor God's
Yeah.
commands, but if we just flee the field of battle, I know there's
Yeah.
prudential reasons. I've got friends who have done it, and God bless them. I don't
Yeah.
fault
No
them.
judgment. Not everyone's a
Yeah,
Marine, but if
at
you're a
the same
Marine, you're
time,
doing it. Mhm.
do your job,
Mhm.
and there's certain people we need in certain places. I think of
Well, and
this.
that's the, um the picture I think of him as well is my book. I kinda wanted it to be the anti-Benedict option book, which is, "Hey, I feel like I'm not judging, but it sounds like Benedict is like Judah. Hey, they've won. Let's hunker down and hope they leave us alone."
Right.
And I'm sort of like with Samson of, "No, that's not how it works. God is infinite. He gave us a command to go into all nations and disciple them, not to hunker down and hope they go away."
Yeah, I mean, a recent example is up in Seattle with this pastor Russell Johnson, and whatever his theological convictions are, he's obviously doing something about
Mhm,
the kind of leftism and the degeneracy in Seattle, and they've been attacked.
mhm.
And he's standing for the Lord publicly.
Yep.
And as a Christian, I think if some might look at that and be like, well, it's just for fame or whatever. And I'm like, praise God, bless him and protect
Mhm.
his church
Yeah,
because
more of
we
the
need more
reading the
of,
motives, yeah, of
yeah, we
he
need
just did it
to
for that reason.
we need more of
Well, think about your
guys.
case. I mean, I'm sure your audience understands what Boulder is, but for, broader audience who might watch as well, you planted a flag right in the middle of a place that's draped with the LGBTQ flag, and you say, "We're gonna have a faithful reformed church right here." That's the same thing.
Yeah, I like to think so. We're just trying to be faithful to what we got and
Yeah.
trust the Lord along the way. And God has been very generous. I mean, God has been very merciful to use kind of a very rough around the edges and immature at times pastors to grow something into what we have now, a beautiful church that's
Mhm.
doing wonderful things in our city and ministering to families.
Yeah, well, when you and I first
Um,
spoke, you
you
were
know,
raising money
oh, go ahead.
to put money down for a church land, and so then this last time I was there, I saw the completed building and the fruition of all that work.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, God has been so good to us. Um, One of the things that we think of with Christianity, and there's several books coming out on this, but the Christian kind of ethos today in evangelicalism is almost to be a loser, to embody a
Yeah.
loser.
Mhm.
And so you'll get kind of a lot of verses slathered together to manufacture a version of the Christian life in
Mhm.
which it's kind of just to exist as a doormat, to never fight back, to never resist.
Yep.
And we take Jesus's verses out of context, do not resist the evildoer, all this kind of stuff. And I just think this is a really important topic to unpack for the listener and for a wider audience as well, because so many Christians they're just not well formed on these matters. So how are we to understand kind of this? Samson's obviously not a loser. He does
Mhm.
die, but for God's glory and to serve God's purposes.
Yeah.
How
Well,
does
that's another
Samson
one I was
provide a
thinking another narrative I was thinking of,
better
just like the
picture?
Benedict option or the Jordan Peterson option or the, uh, Andrew Tate narrative. I was thinking about this exact one as well. It's almost as if the sacrifice of Christ is where he committed suicide by Roman soldier. Like you might say a perpetrator commits suicide by cop. He just commits suicide by Roman soldier. He just lets them do whatever they want. And that's not what's happening at all. He's not having this done to him. He's going in victory to the cross. So he prayed in the garden, "Let this pass from me, but not my will, your will be done." And so clearly the answer was, you need to do this, and he did it. And he could have called down angels at any time. So yeah, I think the larger American and really the West, isn't it? The whole West, like they've abandoned Christianity, but they have one tiny thing they think is Christianity, which is let everyone beat you up, and that's what they're letting happen to the West. And yeah, that's what I wanted Samson to correct, to say, no, you need Christian men to stand up and say, this is what the law of God says. Now the Philistines can come live with us under the law of God. But you don't just have a Philistine set up camp in Israel worshiping Dagon. So anytime the left goes to the Old Testament and says, "Oh, they say this or that about the sojourner," that's absolutely true. And the sojourner is keeping the law of Moses. They're not setting up their own little temple to something.
Yeah, like a giant Hindu statue, which
Mhm.
we
In
see
Texas, of
in
all
in
places.
Texas. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Well,
So real quick about the Gaza thing, just to help everyone with the imagery here, he he goes down there. He stays at that place. That's all that's said about it. Because then the next thing that happens is they're looking, the Philistines are looking for him, so he sneaks out and he breaks the gates of the city. Now these are massive gates that meant to keep out an invading army. No one, even a roided up guy, could not break these and lift them up. So he breaks them, he lifts them up, he carries them miles and holds them up to show what he did. This imagery is very deep for Christianity. This goes back to the Garden of Eden. And they're expelled from the garden. A cherubim is put there with the flaming sword to guard the way. And then you have the Psalms telling us that the Messiah opens the gates for his people to go through. And then you have the temple with the holiest of places guarded by the curtain, which has cherubim embroidered on it. And when Christ is crucified, that's ripped. And so Samson is one of these images of the Old Testament of what Christ does, which is, as sinners, the way to God is barred to us. And the Messiah opens those doors for us so we have access and restoration to God. So this is a very important story. People stop at the first verse about the prostitute, and they miss all of the deep imagery here.
So good. Well, I want to make sure people know where to pick up the book. Is it available on
Let me tell you
Amazon?
about, I didn't get to Delilah.
Oh,
Is
yeah,
that
go
right?
ahead. Yeah.
No, the Delilah thing is important because people say he's such an idiot. She asks him for the secret. He tells her, they rush in, but he didn't tell her the real secret. Doesn't he realize what's happening by the second or third time? Instead of reading it as he's being long-suffering with his wife, he, as a human, wants his wife to turn to him, not to the Philistines. But she sells him for silver coins and denies him 3 times. Why did Christ let Peter deny him 3 times? Doesn't he know what Peter's going to do? Well, he loved Peter. He had 3 opportunities to repent as well. And so the Samson Delilah story is a beautiful picture of Christ's love for his bride. He wants that tender relationship. He's laying his head on her lap, and he wants her heart to be his. But she refuses and gives it to the Philistines. And he accepts that to the point of he does give her that secret. He is humble low and made a slave. He could have just said, I don't know, just rip the place apart before he gives her the secret. But he loves her that much to say he'll even die rather than allow her to face harm. So this story, again, is Christ and his bride, and it has the specific details of Christ's betrayal as well. And we miss it if we think he's just a knucklehead who likes women too much.
Okay, so then on that, you mentioned Andrew Tate earlier, who I think I've seen a few clips of his go around, but there is this kind of resurgence of men looking for success, wealth, power, influence, women, all this kind of stuff. Kind of, as young men or any man might be drawn to that, how does Samson offer us a better way?
Yeah, think in Samson, although there's these 3 stories there's 3 different women in the story, none of them are at the same time. This is someone who's looking for marriage. His first wife is killed. He's a widower. And so by the time he gets to Delilah, it's not as if he's got a wife somewhere else. So each time you're seeing the picture of the monogamous love, which is really teaching us again about Christ and his bride. Christ doesn't have 50 brides. And so we as men get to participate in the imagery by having a bride that we love in that same way. And so the idea that it's about personal, pleasure or something, there is pleasure in the marriage bed, but to think that it's what Andrew Tate offers, you lose all of the glory, all of the transcendent meaning of marriage. And there was that picture last winter of him. He's working out in his mansion, and I guess he's really proud of how he looks, but he's all alone. I mean, so I guess someone's filming him maybe as a tripod, but what a horrible life to just be alone in your mansion lifting weights. But the way he approaches relationships, he'll never have anything besides that.
Yeah, it's very sad. And so what we're saying and what I'm trying to articulate for men is like, if you want glory, if you want to find those desires that God has put in the hearts of all men for eternity, which that's glory, then that way we understand why it appeals to men. Men are naturally drawn to ambition, power, influence, authority. The way of the world is empty, like that
Yeah.
room. It's very empty, and we want men to live a full life. And yes, go slay giants, be strong, accomplish great things,
Go
but all
down to the Philistines and take the battle to them.
yes, exactly. We want all of that. but that's not going to be found apart from Christ, and it's not going to be found apart from living according to God's ways. I think it's a
Yep.
necessary reminder for men today, and
Yep.
unfortunately, the church doesn't seem prepared for this. They still are trotting out the same kind of loser theology,
Mhm.
a paradigm of leadership that isn't leadership; it's just service. So hopefully, your book will be of great use to many, many men. I really
Thank
hope
you.
that.
Yeah,
Where
thanks
can
for telling me
people?
about it.
Yeah, for
You can tell
sure.
I'm pretty excited about it. I hope people, like you said, they get some of that message out of it. And I hope it inspires the idea of the Great Commission is a wonderful adventure for any man, because men do have the desire for adventure, and the world is still out there for us to go into all nations, making disciples.
Yeah, it's excellent. Where can people pick up a copy of your book?
It's on Amazon.
Okay, great. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And
All
if
right, thank
people
you.
want to keep up with the work you're doing, where should they follow you?
Yeah, I try to keep my name the same, so it's just Dr. Owen Anderson on X or Facebook or YouTube, and on Substack. Substack's mostly devoted to the nonsense going on at ASU. So you'll go there and you'll find out all about how we had a whole class about the benefits of polyamory on state taxpayer dime.
That's insane. Well, yeah, if you want to read about that, head over to Dr. Owen Anderson's Substack. Owen, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. It's always fun to talk with you.
Well, thanks for tuning in today for another episode of Foolproof Theology. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Share it with a friend who needs to know more about Samson. It's a great opportunity to inspire other men to live gloriously for God in our day. I want to make sure you remember my website, which has recently been redone, jchasedavis.com. You can go over there and catch up on articles and other sermons I'm posting. Keep up with the field notes section to see where I've been writing and producing lately. So head over to Chase Davis. And as always, you can subscribe on the Patreon and we can interact there. You can also get pre-releases of every episode. And so head over to the Patreon link in the show notes, subscribe wherever you are listening, smash the like button, whatever they say, give it a 5-star rating, share this episode with a friend, and I'll see you next time.